G'day mate, 40 here. So no signs that Trump's momentum is slowing. No signs in early voting data that Trump is not cruising for victory. Long article in the New York Times today about a historian of fascism, Robert Paxton, how he's long thought that the term fascism was overused when applied to American politics. But now, as we come to the closing days of the 2024 election, he's changed his mind. Now thinks that Donald Trump and the MAGA movement bear many of the hallmarks of fascism, and this is a story that's dominating the news. We have thinly sourced articles such as from The Atlantic that are then picked up by the rest of the media, saying that Donald Trump once said that Hitler did some good things, and that Donald Trump said that he wished that he had Hitler's generals. And let's say that's true. So what with regard to those purported Trump remarks? Whether or not Hitler did some good things depends entirely upon your particular hero system. So Hitler was wildly popular until he invaded Poland. Right? The invasion of Poland was not popular with Germans, but up until that point, he had been a wildly successful politician from the perspective of the overwhelming majority of the German people. From the perspective of Jews, he was terrible. From the perspective of German non-Jews, he was overwhelmingly popular. Was the German officer class a superior class of military officers? Yes, it was. Right. Germany had a decentralized military command that enabled its officers to exercise larger amounts of discretion than most military officers of their rank, and because they were so smart and accomplished that they had an outsized impact pretty much every time that equal numbers of Germans and the enemy met on the battlefield in both World War I and World War II, the Germans won. Germans were, soldier for soldier, the superior fighting force in both World War I and World War II. So one can recognize that the enemy has amazing traits. You don't have to just think that all goodness and excellence resides on your team. Now, CBS News led last night with this thinly sourced Atlantic piece by its editor, Jeffrey Goldberg, that Donald Trump had said that Hitler had done some good things. And this is seeming advantage that the Democrats have, and that they can push stories into the news that just rely on one anonymous source. Right? If Republicans wanted to push similar story into the news, they would have to come up with several sources, including sources on the record. So when it comes to publishing damaging stories about politicians, right, the news media in particular is willing to go with a much lower bar with regard to Donald Trump than any other politician in recent memory. And this is seemingly a big Democratic advantage, except the enemy always gets a say in war. If you look at politics as an example of war, all right, the ease with which the mainstream media publishes thinly sourced attacks on Donald Trump tends to discredit the mainstream media with those who aren't rabidly anti-Trump. And so you'd think this would just be a big advantage for the Democrats, but it ends up being a significant hit to media credibility. And when scientists politicize themselves by becoming more overtly pro-Democratic Party, pro-left-wing partisans, then that discredits science in the eyes of people who aren't rabid lefties. And so scientists and the media think that they're discrediting Donald Trump. But what's happening is that they are largely discrediting themselves in the eyes of those who aren't left-wing partisans. So I could use my platform right now. I could use the exhilarating power of talking to 38 people live over YouTube, and I could go on an attack, and I could say all sorts of awful things about someone. And do you think that would necessarily rebound to the detriment of the person I was attacking? No. If I say things that are ridiculous, that lack factual foundation, that come across as unfair, if I come across as unhinged, right, I just do myself far more damage than I do the object of my scorn. Also, everything I say, it takes place against the background of my narrative, right? We all have a narrative. I have a colorful narrative. You have your own narrative, and we understand things that people say and do against the background of their history. And so two people can say the exact same words and do the exact same things, but because people have different narratives and they move in different social worlds, the implications of their actions and words will be vastly different, even if the acts... Jesus Christ, man! Even if the actions and words are identical. My God, the reckless driving. So this is a moral dilemma and psychological dilemma and social dilemma that I often face. Right? How much should you protest when other people violate traffic rules that put your life in danger? So if I protest big time, the downside to that is that I will be upset for possibly hours afterward. All right, I will lose my equilibrium. I will lose my emotional sobriety. And the other downside is that the most likely response is that the other party will say F you and just become more fortified in their conviction that they did the right thing, that even if they violated the literal rules of the road, that they obeyed the rules of the road as their actually practice. Also, as I'm a pedestrian, the other party has far more ability to do me significant harm than I do to hurt them. So, reluctantly coming to the conclusion, the best thing is a generally rather understated reaction when other people violate the rules of the road, placing my life in danger and the life of other people in danger. Another thing that I've reluctantly come to is that unless I appear to have much in common with another party, there's no point in trying to hold people back from walking into traffic. So there is considerable reckless behavior by many pedestrians in LA, just walking into traffic. There is a California traffic code that the pedestrian has the right of way, but it seems incredibly reckless to just walk into traffic. And if I try to restrain strangers, right, they don't tend to react well. So why should I put my life in danger for people who do not value their own life? And I think this applies to more than just traffic. So if it's a fellow Orthodox Jew or someone who I think might listen, I will try to stop someone from walking into traffic. But if I feel like I have nothing in common with the person, or if they're deranged or dangerous, then I take no action. And living in the big city, it tends to harden you to the fate of strangers who are bent on self-destruction. And I apply this more widely in my life. I do not follow people on social media who engage in self-destructive behavior. I don't allow people on my show who exhibit self-destructive behavior on an ongoing basis, and I don't allow people in my life, deeply in my life, if they're engaged in a self-destructive downward spiral, unless I see that they are taking strong steps to find recovery from that. So I will not allow anyone to indulge, for example, in suicidal ideation with me. It's like, no, that's not on. You should talk to someone about these things, but I am not that person. The worst thing about being an addict is that only addicts will hang out with you. You're an alcoholic, a drug addict, an under-owner, debtor, sex and love addict, porn addict, gambling addict, right? Productive, high-achieving, emotionally sober people will not want to hang out with you. Had a great discussion on the show last night with Kip and Elliot Blatt and myself about why we're bachelors. So I'm 58 years of age. Why the heck am I a bachelor? And here is how I understand that. Until 3 years ago, my vegetarian diet had just wrecked my health. And it was only when I started taking beef organ capsules on a regular basis that I got substantial recovery in my physical health, a lot more strength and energy. Only a year ago did I get an ADHD diagnosis and medication for my ADHD, which has enabled me to be much more focused, calm, and less unnecessarily offensive and less needy for constant stimuli. Then the third thing that's kept me over the years from getting married is that till last 10 years I had all sorts of emotional addictions that were creating an unmanageable life. So you may be familiar with step one in Alcoholics Anonymous. We admitted we were powerless over alcohol and that our lives had become unmanageable. So that whole concept of powerlessness might rub you the wrong way. But I think most people can understand what it's like to have a life that's unmanageable. If you have a life that's unmanageable, it's very likely that you have some emotional addictions that are interfering. So are you continually doing things that you know are against your own best interests? If you can't help engaging in the use of substances and behaviors that are against your own best interests, then you likely have some kind of emotional addiction operating in your life. And so until I got emotionally sober through various 12-step programs for love, for sex, for relationships, for money, then I would have been a poor bet to get married. Now, when I talk about these topics with other bachelors, I notice this with men in general, that you ask them a personal question and they want to transfer it to the macro, to society as quickly as possible. So often you'll ask a man why you're not married. As quickly as possible, they want to shift the conversation to the state of the economy, the state of technology, the state of male-female relationships generally, female tendencies to hypergamy, all these things outside themselves. People, in particular men, even when they honestly want to share on what's troubling them, they want to quickly transfer the topic of conversation from their own flaws, their own self-defeating behavior, to society, the economy. They're yearning to speak in religious platitudes if they're religious, or in New Age platitudes if they're into that, or to echo the party line from the National Review or the New York Times. So overwhelmingly, it seems, for people, 99.9% of their thoughts about life come from other people. Right? It's quite rare to encounter an individual, unique thinker. I mean, overwhelmingly, I notice most of my friends are on the right, and overwhelmingly, I notice people just echoing talk radio talking points. So we are at the corner here of Veteran and Westwood Boulevard. We're 5 miles east of Santa Monica. A lot of men just don't want to be married, and it is that simple. Also, due to lawfare and changes in the law and in how judges enforce divorces, there's a good case to be made for certainly secular men that marriage is not as good a deal as it used to be. Okay, Bob says, I'm no longer a bachelor, but I'm not married. How could you no longer be a bachelor if you're not married. This is not Melbourne, mate. Yeah, I am Jewish. I am a convert to Orthodox Judaism. So it's hard to believe that Westwood was the center of Los Angeles nightlife in the 1980s until one evening in 1987, I believe, where there was some gang member who started shooting, and he killed an innocent young Asian woman, and just overnight nightlife died in Westwood, and it shifted to Sunset Boulevard. So one shooting has the power to completely transform a neighborhood. And a shooting in Westwood at that time was very rare. Like a shooting in Brentwood or Beverly Hills is rare. A murder in West LA is quite rare. And murders take place all the time in East LA and Central LA, and they don't get as much media attention because there are so many of them. Also, the news media as a business has shifted towards a focus on more affluent people. That's just how the business works. If you have an affluent audience, you can charge more for advertising, and you're more likely to be able to secure subscriptions. And so there's much less focus in the news media now on poor people and the working class. Instead, the focus is more like the focus of the New York Times, New York Magazine, which started in the 1960s, aimed at a high-income, affluent, successful subscriber base. New York Review of Books, again, aimed at the upper middle class. And that's overwhelmingly where the news business has shifted. And so the focus of news and culture stories, business stories, are going to be on the fortunes of the middle class, upper middle class, and above, rather than the working class. So there was a comment in one of my recent videos, do I run anymore? And I ran from ages about 11 to 13. And when I was age 12, I finished 5 marathons. But at age 14, I developed Osgood-Schlatters disease, so that my knees would swell up when I started running. And several of my friends had the same problem. It seems to be a relatively common problem among teenage boys anyway. And then by about age 18, I made some recovery from that. And I would run from age 18 to 22, 2, 3, 4 miles. Not vast distances. But then I came down with chronic fatigue syndrome in February of 1988. Never been a regular runner since. And as you age, your lungs have less oxygen capacity. I noticed the last time I was in Australia, and when the big waves would wash over me at Bondi Beach, that I was struggling to get enough breath. I'd dive under the wave, and I'd come up. And because I don't normally swim, right, I was probably breathing harder. And so I was struggling for breath. And this is the first time that I've been out in the ocean and that I remember struggling for breath. And it took me a month of swimming until I got into sufficient shape where this was no longer an issue. And now, even though right now I could walk 20 miles, I am going to be out of breath if I jog a quarter mile. So as you age, your ligaments aren't as flexible and durable, and jogging puts a lot of strain on your connective tissue, on your ligaments. So I ride a bike, and I definitely need to do more cardio. I do get out of breath too easily, and if I was to start swimming in the ocean with big waves and having to dive under the waves right now, I'd run out of breath because I haven't done much swimming for 18 months, and it'd probably take me over a month to get back into shape to do swimming between diving under big waves. And I remember there was this one incident that brought home my lack of cardio health. So about 20 years, I was dating this beautiful woman. Right? She's the only girlfriend that I've had who my friends were routinely hitting on and trying to get with. Right? She was so beautiful that my friends were willing to sacrifice or risk or jeopardize their friendship with me. She would just drive them insane. She was not just hot. She was not just attractive. She had a look that said, if I love you, you can do anything to me. So there was this smoldering sex kitten vibe that she gave off that just drove men crazy. And I remember the first time I was with her, right, an incredibly exciting time. I'd been dating her for 2 or 3 weeks, and now is the moment for the ultimate deed. And I wanted to take full advantage of it and do a variety of positions. And I made a mistake when I decided, let's swap so that she can be on top. And I lost my wood. It was so embarrassing, right? I wasn't able to finish, wasn't able to complete. I just lost it. And it was the first time that I remember that happening to me. And from that time onward, I'd have some problems in that department. I just met a rude reality that I had some cardio issues, because the strength of your wood is a solid indicator of your cardio health. And I have attractive female friends who've often dated older men who weren't able to perform. Right? They lack the cardio health. So I'm not sure why the older men didn't take Viagra. But that's been an issue, I know, with attractive female friends of mine. When they've dated older men, often they just can't perform. Sometimes I think there's a substantial number of men who just fear that level of intimacy. Now, it can be a moral and traditional and religious value to save sex for marriage, but often people use that moral, traditional, and value-based rhetoric to hide that they are afraid of losing control, they're afraid of intimacy, and they hide behind religious rhetoric. Right? And often it comes from people who are leading overwhelmingly secular lives. They're not sacrificing anything for their religion. They don't attend services. By no objective measure would you consider them religious. But when it comes to avoiding intimacy with a woman, right, they will seize on religion as an excuse, because inside they just have so much anxiety. People don't usually say what they mean, and they don't usually mean what they say. And religion is just so often used to cloak people's true motives and true fears and true anxieties. And Donald Trump is such a shocking counterpoint to this culture of inhibition and fear of loss of control. Because Donald Trump does not fear losing control, right? He didn't fear losing control when he stormed the beach inside Stormy Daniels, right? For him, his Vietnam was dating during the AIDS crisis. And his rhetoric and his charisma shined through. His performance at the McDonald's, right, shone because it was so authentic, right? The left and the media was attacking Donald Trump's McDonald's appearance as inauthentic and fake and staged, but he was so real, right? As a germaphobe, he rejoiced that no human hands touched the fries that he was preparing at McDonald's. Right? If you just listen to his conversations, they were the type of conversations he would have with people if there were no cameras rolling. Matt Labash, formerly of the Weekly Standard, who wrote an article about me back in 1998. He spent time with Donald Trump off the record, and he recalls that Trump was just tremendously entertaining. So you can completely disagree with Trump on all sorts of policy issues, but you'll likely just enjoy him. Same with Tucker Carlson. There are all sorts of reasons why you'll be appalled at this or that thing that Tucker Carlson has said publicly, and yet once you get to spend time with him, it's really hard not to like him. It's interesting that Tucker Carlson will be joining Donald Trump on the campaign trail. So for most pundits, Tucker Carlson's performance with Darryl Cooper boosting this Nazi apologist as the greatest living historian would be career-ending. But Tucker has overcome the wave of revulsion directed at him with accurate, devastating criticisms. And Tucker didn't apologize. He didn't repeat his error either, right? He hasn't poked the bear again since then. But he never apologized, and now he's joining Donald Trump on the campaign trail. And I don't think that hatred of Jews is something that characterizes Tucker Carlson. I think it's more like he has some degree of audience capture, and he has had a significant degree of success and popularity through being anti-establishment and saying edgy things, and that intoxicated him, warped his judgment, and led him to saying some stupid things because he's had so much success bucking the establishment, establishing a following. Now, his following is overwhelmingly on the lower IQ scale. When he was at Fox, right, he would do a show that would appeal both to a low IQ crowd, but also he was the most significant intellectual on the right. Right, he would often stimulate and lead all sorts of intellectual discussions on the right. I don't think he's played that role since he was fired from Fox almost 18 months ago. So he has less influence now, but he received a rapturous welcome at the Republican National Convention, and that he's going to be appearing with Donald Trump in the closing stages of the campaign. It's incredible that he's been able to surmount the devastating criticism that he richly deserved over his promotion of Nazi apologist Darryl Cooper. And how on earth does Tucker Carlson get away with this? Because he's incredibly likable. Because he does project an aura of joy, and he's edgy, he's fun, and great. Another car turning right when pedestrians have the right of way. So Israel has arrested a bunch of spies for Iran who are Israeli citizens, and some of them at least were Jewish Israelis. So what the heck is going on there? Historically, Israel has not had a problem with its own citizens spying for enemy powers. And I think it reflects how Israel has become so divided that a significant number of Israelis have more hatred for Bibi Netanyahu than they do for Iran and its proxies. And I don't think this would have happened in the previous 50 years. It's only something that's become particularly intense over the past 3 years. That's the downside as your country becomes more polarized, more partisan, that you'll have a significant number of your citizens becoming willing to side with the enemy because they have less visceral hatred and contempt for the enemy than they do for their own government. And what are we going to see after Donald Trump is elected this fall? Right, the level of disgust and hatred for Trump is on such an intense level, where we see a wave of bombings of American government facilities or of MAGA targets, targeted assassinations, social unrest, equivalent to the weather underground in the late 60s, early 70s. And how long can opponents of Donald Trump their hatred at an intense level? So do you think the hatred of Donald Trump is more intense now than it was? It's probably hard to maintain an intensity of loathing for Trump over 9 years. So perhaps the reception to the Trump election will be more muted than we saw in late 2016, early 2017. Yeah, that Westwood shooting was between Crips and Bloods. An Asian girl got shot in a ricochet. It ruined Westwood. I love history, and I've probably read over 1,000 history books in my life because I've just been reading history since I started reading books on a regular basis at about age 7. Luke quoted Jesus when he faced mortal danger. I had an atheist Asian girlfriend who said that I become very religious during sex because I'm always invoking Christ. In Norway, bachelor is not used for men who are living with a woman. Did the quote, "Don't let USA become Brazil," feel genuine from the woman who drove in the McDonald's? Good question. So overall, I would say that Trump's behavior felt very genuine. But of course, the event was scripted. So you can have a scripted event, and within it, the main has the ability to come across in an authentic and genuine way. Are there any non-car streets in Los Angeles? Very, very few, but that is an increasing trend, right? There's an increasing trend in Los Angeles of removing streets from driving and opening them up to bicycles and pedestrians. Why did Israel restrict its citizens from buying gold? I don't know. Cyberview, I think you put a comment on my channel that I should send out notifications when I go live. Well, if you click the bell on your subscription to the channel, it will automatically send you a notification when I go live. Chat says I dated Asian girls for a long time, but after a while I decided they were just too different culturally. So a lot of nerdy white guys I see with Asian women. It seems to be a good fit. The Asian women are more willing to think long term, to think strategically. Is this guy good husband material? Right? Is this someone who's likely to beat me? Is he likely to be careful with his money, to be a good father to my children? And so I often notice Asian women taking a chance and dating guys that white women would often consider too nerdy. And overwhelmingly, right, almost every single Asian woman, white guy relationship that I've seen has lasted. Right, I can't recall off the top of my head any divorces between my friends, white guys, often that I grew up with, and the Asian women they dated. In fact, I know two brothers who, on their the first marriage was to a white woman. Second marriage, they married Asian sisters, and it's worked. Right, they've had kids, and so all the marriages that I know between white guys, Asian women, have lasted 10, 20, 30 plus years with children. And I also notice it in Orthodox Judaism. Right? I'm aware of several marriages just in my Los Angeles Orthodox Jewish community where Ashkenazi men have married Japanese women who converted to Orthodox Judaism, and the marriage has lasted 10, 20 years. They've got kids. Seems to be a good fit. I'm aware of like one or two marriages among people I know in Orthodox Judaism where you've got a white guy marrying a black woman. I'm not sure in these cases whether the black woman converted or if she was Falashan. but that's exceedingly rare. I remember when I dated the Asian women that I dated were like keenly aware of the negative vibe that they got from other Asian men who resented them from leaving their race and dating outside it. I took the luxury of enjoying a cup of coffee this morning. Right? Normally I have one cup of coffee a week on Sunday mornings before the big show, but my work week ends today, this afternoon, because I've got Jewish holidays beginning at sunset, and so I thought, what the hell? I'm just going to have a cup of coffee this morning. So my mind is firing faster than it normally does because I've had that rare jolt of caffeine. It's so nice when you don't drink coffee regularly and then you enjoy a cup and you really feel it, as opposed to when you start every day with a cup of coffee, then the effect is not nearly as dramatic. You just become dulled to it. So why is the death of Sinwar so important? It's an article in Foreign Policy magazine today, and it begins, point number one is profound and has broad ramifications. The natural human tendency is to personalize everything. Right? The natural human tendency is to take everything personally. If your boss reprimands you for a typo, in all likelihood you'll take that personally and you'll think that he's mean, nasty. And when it comes to political differences, right, we will, most people will think of Republican policies as embodied in the person of Donald Trump. So Trump is not just an individual, he's overwhelmingly a proxy for an attitude towards life of above average level of suspicion of outsiders, an above average commitment to law and order, an above average commitment to making sure the United States does not get screwed in its deals with other countries, an above average commitment to American unilateralism, to the pursuit of American interest, an above average commitment to increasing income for the working class, for the least educated, for those without a high school education or with only a high school education. Right? Donald Trump is a proxy. He is an embodiment. He's a way that people experience politics personally. And if you support the policies, you will be far more likely to like Donald Trump. And so Sinwar was an embodiment of Hamas. And while the death of Sinwar does not mean the end of Hamas, it is a necessary precondition for the end of Hamas. So when Osama bin Laden was killed, right, ordinary Americans celebrated. Right, elites, you didn't see elites out in the street waving the flag. Right, that was a visceral, normie reaction, because what the elite see as symbols, and through their discourse of, careful critical discourse and their attitude of reflexivity, disinterest, trying to rise above the natural passions to recognize the difference between symbols and reality, the normal reaction is to consider the flag of your country sacred, not just as a symbol standing for a constitution and a set of values, but as a sacred thing in and of itself. So the more traditional right-wing, tribal, and nationalist you are, the more likely you are to regard symbols as sacred, the more likely you are to regard vast swaths of life and relationships and interactions within life as holy and sacred. And the more intellectual you are, the more you're a child of the Enlightenment, right, the less likely you are to discern the sacred and the divine in life, and the more likely you are to understand what normal people regard as sacred as just symbolic of a set of abstract values. So normal Americans celebrated the death of Osama bin Laden, not so much exuberance on the part of our intellectual elite, and so too with the death of Sinwar. Normies, right, celebrated this. Normie Americans, normie Israelis, right, celebrated the death of Sinwar. Right, elites, the pundits, not so much exuberance. But the works is that most people tend to personalize these things. Most people don't think in terms of abstract principles of political philosophy, theology, morality. Right? Only about 5% of people can articulate a coherent political philosophy, a coherent worldview. 5%, right? The other 95%, to the extent that they have any reaction to politics, overwhelmingly do it in terms of personalizing it. And the death of Sinwar is the removal of the personification of Hamas. And it also, through his death, it lowers the standing of Hamas in the eyes of both its supporters and detractors. It better enables Israel to focus on other battles, such as against Hezbollah in Lebanon and against Iran. And it vastly increases the odds that Hamas is no longer a coherent hierarchical organization. Hamas is much more likely now to be a splintered, incoherent organization. The more splintered Hamas is, the more likely it is that some members of Hamas will recognize incentives to make deals to perhaps release some of the hostages under their control in return for their life and safety, and perhaps their ability to leave Gaza. There's been abundant news media coverage over the past year about the horrible living conditions for people in Gaza. And it's true. Life is horrible for people in Gaza, and it's unfair that the 3 million people in Gaza have to suffer and lose so many tens of thousands of casualties due to the terror behavior of Hamas. And much of life is just unfair. Right? The way the world works is collective. The world overwhelmingly does not work on an individualized basis. Right? The individual rectitude and morality, spiritual attainment, intellectual attainment of the individuals in Gaza is not going to spare them from the blowback that will inevitably come their way, because Hamas has had control of Gaza since about 2006, and then Hamas invaded Israel on October 7, 2023. And so no matter the individual standing and quality of individual Gazans, they are inevitably going to suffer terribly, because the world works in collective ways. It doesn't work on an individualized basis. Hello, how are you? I am great. I'm looking forward to another few days of Jewish holidays at Shmini Atzeret starting tonight, and then at Simchat Torah. I don't know why Israel restricted its citizens from buying gold. During the Lebanese civil war, the Armenians took a lot of gold out of the country. They run the jewelry industry in Lebanon. Yeah, the Armenians seem to punch above their weight due to their superb middleman capacities. Yeah, in my life experience, Asian women are much less likely to bust your balls publicly. They are less likely to humiliate you publicly. And they tend to be more devoted to traditional values and to caring for their family and to not making waves socially. So they're much more collectivist, and they're less likely to be radical feminists. It's not that they have less of an ego, it's just that their ego is invested in different things than white women, right? It's much more invested in their families. They consider it an honor to look after their aging parents rather than an imposition. Yeah, secular Jewish women are probably more likely to be passionate feminists than any other group. Okay, so I grew up a Seventh-day Adventist. My father's a Seventh-day Adventist theologian. You can Google him, Desmond Ford. My father has 2 PhDs, one in rhetoric from the University of Michigan and one in apocalyptic New Testament literature from the University of Manchester. So my father was a Seventh-day Adventist theologian and evangelist. So the chat says there are about 500,000 Jewish Asian couples. No, this is not Koreatown. This is Westwood. So even though it's the widespread human tendency to personalize everything, that doesn't mean that's the most useful frame. But you can't ignore how most people experience life, right? You may have a superior frame for many issues rather than taking things incredibly personally, but it's useful to recognize that other people experience life differently than you do. So there is a retired general, something like Halevi, who was quoted on ABC News yesterday discussing how Israel is prepared for months of war with Iran. And out of everyone speaking out about the current Israeli-Iranian conflict, he seems to have the most profound insight into what's happening. So he recognizes that Israel is going to keep ratcheting up incentives for Gazans to leave Gaza. It's not in Israel's interest to have 3 million Gazans. The more they can incentivize those people to leave, right, the better it will be for Israel. And he also recognizes that an Israeli war with Iran will not be over in a matter of days, will not be over in a matter of weeks. It will take months. That Iran is going to respond with ballistic missiles to Israel's coming attack, and that the two countries are going to go back and forth. And essentially, Israel is aiming to do to the Iranian regime what it did to the Hezbollah regime in Lebanon and to the Hamas regime in Gaza. So Israel sees the unique opportunity to smash its enemies and to finally go toe-to-toe, engage in a direct war with Iran. And Israel does have superior firepower on its side. It has a superior economy on its side. It has a higher IQ population. And Israel believes that if it can devastate the Iranian National Guard and Iranian police and military facilities, that it will reduce the standing of the Iranian regime in the eyes of its people and dramatically increase the chances for regime change in Iran. And if Donald Trump is elected president, right, Israel will get all the weapons it needs. Right, it'll get access to B-2 or B-52 bombers, to 30,000-pound bombs. Right, Israel will get everything it needs to finish off Iran. And if Donald Trump is not elected, right, Israel still recognizes and will still go to war with Iran directly. It will just be a more complicated and drawn-out fight. So I'm reading the Bob Woodward book, War, and it's a well-written book. It's a pleasure to read. And I say this profoundly disagreeing with its premise, right? Bob Woodward's premise is that the Biden administration's foreign policy will be studied by scholars for generations to come as a model of excellence, while Donald Trump is just reckless, incoherent, and often reprehensible. So it has the opposite point of view from me. And yet this book is an absolute pleasure to listen to as an audible version or to read. There isn't a lot in it about Joe Biden's cognitive capacity, but it does note that by June of 2023, it was obvious to a lot of Biden's donors that he was cognitively not there, that he was senile. So a year before Joe Biden's embarrassing June 27, 2024 debate performance against Donald Trump, it was clear to many Biden donors that he was senile, meaning episodically senile. Right? Joe Biden today has good days and bad days. On good days, he sounds in charge of his faculties. Now, none of us are 100% in charge of our faculties. For example, despite my years of Alexander technique training, I still tighten and compress my lower back when I sit down or in reaction to any strong stimulus. And I also have a tendency to gasp a little bit for air when beginning a sentence. So this is not unique, right? Many Alexander technique teachers will still gasp a little bit for air when they speak, and they'll still tighten and compress their lower back. And so I'm not 100% in charge of my responses. Now, I gasp for air much less dramatically than I did prior to studying Alexander technique, and I have much less unnecessary maladaptive levels of muscular tension and compression in my body than I did prior to studying the Alexander technique, but I still don't have 100% conscious direct control over my responses. So if I were to go back and get more Alexander technique lessons from a great teacher, I would place a lot of emphasis on my unnecessary compression and restriction in my lower back when I sit down, and in my tendency to unnecessarily gasp a little bit for air. And what the heck is the problem with gasping for air a little bit when you speak? One, it's off-putting. Two, it dries your mouth. Three, when you gasp for air, you tighten and compress your neck. And there are more joints in your neck than anywhere else in your body. Have you heard about October theory? It's a new theory sweeping social media. And it's about re-examining your life in the final 3 months of the year. So instead of just entering the beginning of the secular year, January 1, and only making, say, resolutions on one particular day, but instead spend the final 3 months of the year engaging in introspection. And there's a powerful technique that I like to use for engaging in introspection. And that is to increase the amount of time that I spend in awareness rather than judgment. So when I'm talking to you right now, I'm in a state of judgment more than awareness. And you'll notice as you move in and out of judgment and awareness, that judgment is accompanied by a lot more tension, compression, and tightness. You can't think a thought, you can't make a judgment, you can't feel or believe something strongly without having an increased level of tension and compression in your body, in your neck, your shoulders, your back, your ankles, your hips. And one way that I like to release it is I like to expand my field of awareness. So right now, as I'm walking down the street, I'm seeing both sides of the street and then everything in front of me. So it's just a gentle awareness. And when I move into this state of awareness rather than a state of judgment, I feel myself moving up as I let go of unnecessary tension and compression. And I become more alert and movement becomes easier. And then another technique for resetting yourself is to let go of everything that you think you know. So I just did that. And immediately I felt a release of tension in my neck and in my back, across my forehead, around my lips, and a growing sense of ease. Now, of course, all my opinions and convictions just come flowing back, but then I'll practice it again. I'll just release everything that I think I know, and you might have even noticed a gentle change in the quality of my voice as I let go of everything that I thought I knew. Because with the reduction in tension and compression, right, that includes reduction in tension and compression around the voice box. So most people, most of the time, are better served being in a state of awareness rather than a state of judgment. And to periodically let go of everything you think you know, you'll simultaneously let go of all your resentments, or your bitterness, or your anger, or your fear and anxiety. And you get to step into a new, freer, easier world of awareness. And then everything comes rushing back, and so you have to renew it. So Alexander technique, it's like software that you're trying to install on your system. I tell my students to take half a dozen times a day just to expand your field of awareness, consciously move into an attitude of awareness rather than judgment, to think up through your body, to have a gentle wish for your head to release forward and up, to reduce one's habitual tendency of tipping the head back and down, compressing the neck and the back and the shoulders. Now, it's really easy to become a supremacist on race, religion, Alexander technique, whatever your favorite thing is, politics. And that's not an adaptive strategy. So I love the Alexander technique. I've devoted much of my life since 2008 to learning and teaching the Alexander technique. But for certain problems, there are superior solutions, quicker solutions than what the Alexander technique offers. For example, even with my years of Alexander technique training, my voice was still stuck in the back of my larynx. So I'd come at the frog monotone voice. And just one voice lesson with a qualified voice teacher, I was able to make substantial progress, right? Far more progress than I made in all my years of studying the Alexander technique. So she would have me do this. Nya, 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 nya. Nya, 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 nya. So notice the point where you resonate. When you go nya, 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 it's towards the top of your larynx. And when you move the resonance point to the top of your larynx, right, that requires more energy and more upward direction. But then you get to effortlessly project your voice, and you can move your voice out of stuck monotone Kermit the Frog. Yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, 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 1. Yeah, 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 2. Yeah, 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 3. How are you? What's going on, mate? Also, even after I became an Alexander technique teacher, about once a year, my lower back would go out on me. Sometimes I'd even turn for immediate emergency relief from a chiropractor I knew. And then, around December of 2018, I was referred to Gutty Kaufman, who teaches positional release, aka strain counter-strain. And by adopting the practices of positional release, of strain counter-strain, bought his book and began practicing the exercises recommended in his book. And since at least 2020, my lower back occasionally go out on me, but it won't be nearly as severe, and I'll be able to remedy the problem much more quickly through strain counter-strain positional release therapy, and then also the McKenzie method. So McKenzie method is physical therapy, and I believe it was discovered by a physical therapist named McKenzie, who had a patient arrive early for a lesson, and the patient had absolutely debilitating amounts of back pain. And so Mackenzie just told him to go lie down in another room while he finished off with another client. And the man went and he laid down, but in a peculiar position. He misinterpreted Mackenzie's instructions, so he put himself in an unusual position. And I think the guy went to sleep. And when he woke up, his back pain was gone. And that clued Mackenzie into the power of position and positional release. I may be getting my physical therapist mixed up here, but anyway, there's tremendous power in positional release, that if you put yourself in a different position, you can often release muscles that are otherwise habitually in spasm. And it reminds me of the broader philosophical and psychological point that when I place myself in a different situation, I am a different person. I feel like a different person when I'm in synagogue with friends, when I'm in synagogue and none of my friends are there, when I'm in Sydney, or when I'm in Queensland, or San Francisco, or Sacramento, or West LA, or East LA, right? I feel like a completely different person in those situations. I remember when I went back to Sydney for a couple of months, about 2 years ago, right? Almost everything that was of cutting concern for me when I was in LA just disappeared. So I guess that is an example of positional release or situational release. Put myself in a different situation and my habitual problems went away. But check out October Theory, how people are engaging in introspection in the final 3 months of the year. Seems like a beautiful social media trend. All right, let's go to the chat. Yeah, Trump and Tucker Carlson are not quitters. They don't like to apologize either. History is my favorite subject to read. Says the chat, why did Israel restrict citizens? Luke got his, hey, Ricardo's in the house. I've been reading American Caesar about Douglas MacArthur. Yeah, I read that book. Great read. Work on your core, bro. Absolutely true. When I do core exercises, when I do planks, right, that's one of the first things I do when I start getting lower back problem. Which country are you streaming? I'm in Westwood, bro. Westwood, California. I'm 5 miles from the Pacific Ocean, 5 miles east of Santa Monica. My neck is a disaster degenerative disc disease. What was her name? Who are you referring to, Ricardo? So you can have all sorts of examples of disc degeneration and disc disease, and you can still benefit from Alexander technique. So Alexander technique teachers are not going to look at your radiographic studies, because the Alexander technique is a set of principles that you apply so that you use yourself more gracefully, easily, efficiently. And so even if you have problems with the bones in your neck and their alignment, learning to put less unnecessary pressure on that alignment will make you more effective. Referring to the chiropractor, the one that provided a great deal of relief. That was a bloke. It was a bloke I met in an Orthodox synagogue. And I'm not generally a fan of chiropractic, but I'll admit it, that there were times when I turned to it for emergency relief and it would work. Just one chiropractic session and I'd be able to return to normal life. On the other hand, there were more occasions when several chiropractic sessions would not return me to normal any more than if I'd done nothing. So when my lower back would go out on me, usually by the third day, I'd start to regain freedom of movement. And sometimes I'd go get chiropractic adjustments, and it was still the third day. It takes still 3 days before I was able to get normal approaching normal amounts of freedom of movement. For some reason, I just find planks particularly onerous. I don't do as many planks as I should. But as long as I do a couple of minutes of planking a day, I don't seem to have lower back problems. I don't know why I find that procedure particularly onerous. My daycare lady keeps insisting we take our newborn to a chiropractic. I think that's a terrible idea. I'm sure there are situations where people are well served by chiropractic adjustment, but overall the risks are significant and the benefits don't last long. And it's much more useful to address the patterns of unnecessary muscular tension that are causing your bones to get out of alignment. Right? If the muscle spasms and layers of unnecessary tension and restriction persist in your muscles, right, you can get a chiropractic adjustment that puts the bones back into place. But your muscle habits, your habits of misuse and unnecessary tension and compression, and your habitual muscle spasms will very quickly pull your bones back out of alignment after a chiropractic adjustment, as opposed to you can learn things like positional release so that you can release your own muscle spasms that cause your bones to fall out of alignment. So I am from Currumbong, Australia. I was born in Kurri Kurri. So I grew up about 90 minutes north of Sydney, Australia. I lived in Manchester, England for 18 months when I was 4.5 until 6. Then my dad got his PhD from the University of Manchester and we traveled around Europe for 3 months and returned to Australia in 1972, I believe. I remember listening to ABC News radio reports in 1973 about the Yom Kippur War. Okay, blokes, I'll talk to you later. Bye-bye.